Well, I suggest you read a totally real book that has absolutely no poisoning, maiming, or killing in it called the Holy Bible.
Oh, no. When that book done got then.
The story of Jacob and Esau is one of the most fascinating stories in the Bible. It is a tale of two brothers, trickery, revenge, and ultimately, forgiveness. We are about to take a journey through the chapters Genesis 25 through 33 in the New American Revised Edition of the Bible, looking at these chapters through a Roman Catholic perspective, although viewers of other faiths may find value in the interpretation shown in the video. This is the Bible study of Jacob and Esau. During my time in research for this project, I was able to talk to a lot of experts on the subject, so I will let them introduce themselves now.
Okay, I'm Father Phil Brown. I'm the President Rector of St. Mary's Seminary and University here in Baltimore, Maryland. And for the last couple of years, I've been teaching the Pinkard Scholars Program, which Sean Triplett was a student in 2 years ago, I think. And that's been a very enriching experience for me. I'm really happy that I fell into it, and I was very pleased to have the opportunity to participate in this project.
So I am Dr. Rebekah Hancock. I teach Old Testament Hebrew Bible here at the seminary, but also in the Ecumenical Institute of Theology, and I'm also the Associate Dean of the Ecumenical Institute. My background is Old Testament Hebrew Bible. I did my PhD at Harvard.
Hi, I'm Mr. O'Donnell, and I teach theology and philosophy here at Mount St. Joe's. This is the end of my 18th year, and teach New Testament, church history, Catholic social teaching, and philosophy. And when I first started out, the first several years, I was teaching Old Testament to, I forget if it was sophomores or freshmen back then, but that's my qualifications here.
So I'm Jeff Ross. I'm a theology teacher here at Mount St. Joseph High School, and this is my first year at teaching theology.
I'm Father Mike Triplett. I'm pastor here at Our Lady of Perpetual Help. I've been serving here for 4 years. I've been a priest for coming up on 16 years.
Genesis 25 begins with the genealogy segment, which may not seem important to the average viewer. So we will first answer why this is important.
You really want to draw someone into a conversation today and make them feel that they're being heard and listened to. A common topic people are going to come back to is their family. You know, what are family traditions around the holidays? What do they do on a daily basis? Who are the important people in their life? It really is effective in getting people to talk. And part of the reason is it helps form a lot of who we are, of how we see the world. It influences, our outlook on the world and what's meaningful to us. There are definitely exceptions and people that turn away from the faith or go to the faith, but for many of us, we've been handed on the faith, and our relationship with God is passed on.
I certainly think that they should not be interpreted literally because they have incredibly exaggerated years. You know, I think Adam lived to be 900 and Noah 800. And
also I would say something about where, if you think about like in Genesis where the genealogy is placed, it kind of has an important function there narratively as well. It parallels in a certain way what we already see in the creation narrative, right? The end of the creation story talks about, this kind of being the generations, the sort of the same language that is used in the genealogy. So on one sense, there's kind of the generations of the heavens and the earth, right? Kind of, and then a parallel between what happens in creation and what happens in the human community. So sort of God's acting in those two ways.
It's a way of kind of telling salvation history, kind of making it a coherent whole. And what I've talked to my students about is, to illustrate that, is the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, where the genealogy, right, goes from, I believe Matthew's is Abraham all the way to Jesus. And so we are given Jesus as the fulfillment of salvation history, of these promises that were made to Abraham long ago.
The major story of the Old Testament is God's fidelity to human beings, but also in particular God's fidelity to the people Israel, because God's promises were made to Abraham and then to the Hebrew people when they were in Egypt as God's chosen people. And in the Old Testament, God's action for a nation or for a community always is transmitted through a particular person.
Genesis 25 begins with the genealogy of Abraham and Keturah, who have Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Ishbak, Shua, and Midian. I'm sorry if I butchered any of those names and any of the names I read in the future. I probably will. Midian has Hefer, Hancock, Abida, Elda. Yokshan has Sheba and Dudan. And Dudan has the Ashurim, the Letushim, and the Leumim. In Genesis 25, 5 through 6, it's mentioned that everything Abraham owned was deeded to Isaac. But he makes grants to his other sons and sends them eastward to Kedem. Abraham lives to 175. Abraham dies and is buried next to Sarah by Isaac and Ishmael in the cave of Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field he brought from the Hittites. Isaac settles near Beer Lahai Roy. Ishmael, son of Abraham and Hagar, has Nebaioth, Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishna, Kedema, Napish, Jetor, Tema, Adad, Masa, and Duma. These sons were the chieftains of 12 tribes. Ishmael lives for 137 years. The Ishmaelites ranged from Havilah by Shur to Asher. Now we go back to Isaac, who married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac entreaties God to have Rebekah become pregnant as she is sterile, and God hears this. However, the babies jostle in the womb so much that Rebekah exclaims,
"What good will this do me?"
and approaches God for consultation. Hold on, what? In the early chapters of the Bible, God is very close to humanity in that he sometimes appears as if he is simply on earth. This isn't typically how we think of God in modern day. I will have the experts clear this up.
God did not reveal himself to be a God outside of time and space, to simply be our creator who is just viewing us. God wants relationship. You know, the whole purpose of the covenant was not simply for us. It wasn't like an idea of, oh, I need servants in the earth, or I want my will carried out, so you'll do that. You're a functionary for me. No, God wanted to be their God, just as they were to be his people.
What I think the authors of the Old Testament were trying to do was showing, perhaps, metaphorically, how remarkably miraculous their presence even was. Israel was a young country that should not have been able to conquer its stronger, more powerful enemies, and yet they did. And so their stories are written in such a way that they emphasize the presence of God. In hindsight, they looked back and they said to themselves, God had to have been on our side for us to conquer Canaan and to defeat our enemies and to establish ourselves in the world.
The other thing to say about the Old Testament text is that there are a variety of different authors and writers. People talk about different sources behind the biblical text. And so probably one of the things sort of on the human level that's happening is that there are different people talking about God in different ways based on different experiences, right? So the Genesis 2 and 3 story. Some have suggested this comes from an author from the time of the monarchy, the Yahwist writer who's writing in a much more personal way about God, whereas the priestly source, which is probably a later source, kind of talks about God in this more transcendent way.
God is depicted as, like intimately involved in the lives of the people of Israel. There are elements in which, God, because God is like wholly other, right? I mean, God is intimately involved and yet at the same time is beyond, is unlike anything else in our experience. And that reality is sometimes illustrated through stories in which God isn't fully present, right? Like God communicates through angels. God communicates through dreams. God is like shrouded in smoke.
I think there are two reasons for the directness of God's relationship and communication with individuals in the Old Testament. One is to reflect the heroic nature of those individuals and that they are holy persons and therefore have this kind of direct relationship with God. And then also I think it's a literary device to authenticate the message that's being delivered through that person, that it is coming directly from God.
When Rebekah approaches God, God says that two nations are quarreling within her womb, and that one shall surpass the other, the older serving the younger. These two nations would be the Israelites and the Edomites. When Isaac is 60, the babies are born. A reddish baby with a body like hairy mantle emerges first, named Esau. The red references Edom, called the Red Country due to reddish sandstone, and the hairy aspect referenced Seir, another name for Edom, which means hairy, as well as the term Esau, meaning hairy. Behind Esau is Jacob, who comes out of the womb gripping Esau's heel. Jacob's name means to follow or supplant. Both grow up, with Esau becoming a skillful hunter, with Jacob preferring to keep to his tents. Isaac preferred Esau, while Rebekah preferred Jacob. One day, Jacob was cooking a stew when a famished Esau came in from the open.
Let me gulp down some of that red stuff. I'm starving.
That is why he was called Edom.
First, give me a birthright in exchange for it. Look, I'm dying over here. What good is any birthright gonna do me? Swear to me first.
Esau sold Jacob his birthright under oath, and Jacob gave him some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate, drank, got up, and went his way, caring little for his birthright.
And I think this story just draws into the fact that Esau was willing and an instant, because of some hunger, to allow that to control him. And then, of course, the path that moves forward. Because he's instinctual and he's willing to allow his brother to manipulate him in this way, he loses out on that birthright.
Well, again, the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, were the ones who were writing their history. And I think they were kind of poking fun at the descendants of Esau because they had achieved, the blessing and the land that had rightfully should have gone through the lineage of Esau.
The scripture scholars believe that Esau was representative of the hunter-gathering tribe, and that Jacob was the shepherd or sheep herder, which was a more settled, civilized community and way of life. In other words, hunters are off hunting, taking advantage of the moment, what's available now, and sort of living a more wild lifestyle that's, again, just living in the moment, whereas the shepherd community is cultivating for the long term the life of the community and the individuals involved. And so his giving up his birthright is a way of expressing that reality, that he was not one that was putting a lot of stake into long-term plans and cultivation and civilization, but was sort of acting on the spur of the moment and his immediate needs and desires, or at least is the way I understand it.
Jacob is often portrayed as a kind of trickster character. And one of the things people have suggested in kind of looking at Jacob as a figure, he is that kind of, he's the younger brother. He's portrayed as sort of the weaker of the two, right? Because having less sort of status and power. But it's a story about the kind of little guy getting one over on the big guy, right? And in some ways, again, this is Israel's own story about itself, right? It's a small nation, kind of in the midst of some larger nations. And it tells these stories and sometimes uses these trickster characters, these sort of underdogs who kind of get one over on the big guy, right? And it's a way of talking about themselves, right? Is sort of having some ability to be able to survive even in the midst of these sort of stronger forces.
God has a plan, right? God is going to, God ultimately is in charge of the fulfillment of salvation history. And one way in which that fundamental reality is made known through Scripture is that God chooses those who we don't think would be the natural leaders to be the leaders, to be the vehicles of salvation. And so Esau is the stronger. I think, he's favored by Isaac. You would think he would be the one to carry on the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham. But God switches that up, and he chooses someone we wouldn't think would be right.
Genesis 26 begins with a famine, specified not to be the same as the one occurring in the days of Abraham. So Isaac goes down to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. God appears to Isaac and says not to go down to Egypt, but to continue to camp where he is told in this land. In return, God promises to bless Isaac and give them these lands in fulfillment of his promise to Abraham because of his obedience. Therefore Isaac settles in Gerar and is asked questions about his wife. Fearing he would be killed as her husband due to her beauty, he lies.
She's my sister.
Roll a deception.
Yeah, 20.
They believe him. A long time passes, and one day Abimelech looked out his window to see Isaac, quote, fondling Rebekah.
Isaac! Yes, sir.
How could you do this to us? It would have taken very, very little for one of our men to have lain with your wife. And you would have thus thought to bring that guilt upon us?
I thought that I might lose my life on her account.
Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall be put to death. Is that understood, gentlemen? Okay.
Hold on, this seems familiar, which is the same case for what you are about to hear with Beersheba. Yes! Those familiar with Genesis may have noticed that this story is extremely similar to something that happens earlier in Genesis to Abraham. In fact, this is because multiple groups wrote the Old Testament, including the Yahwist and the Elohis. There's a lot to talk about with each group, but the main thing one needs to know here is that this is the Yahwist version of the story told earlier with Abraham by the Elohis.
The stories about the patriarchs and these kind of also hint and look forward to the Exodus story itself, right? To the way in which they end up kind of in exile and sort of under threat. Not in exile, but in Egypt and under threat. So I think it kind of demonstrates the fragility of their relationship when kind of outside of their, living under kind of a foreign power, and the fragility that's present there. You think about the Joseph story and all of that and how things turn.
This is where sometimes it just takes the messiness of humanity is there. God does not ask him to lie. Just as I don't think that Jacob was in the right for lying. The manipulation that takes place. He's never rewarded for that. And I think in this instance, where he wants to protect himself, the instinct is, if they see me as the husband of Rebekah and they want Rebekah, they off me. But if I'm the brother, then they can have their way. And they don't have to harm me in the midst of that. And of course, then the king sees that they aren't brother and sister, and is offended, of course. Why didn't you just be honest with me? But the king also makes the decree then to protect that Rebekah, and of course the marriage between them.
So that is an echo of what Abraham, right, did with Abram did with Sarai in I think it's Genesis like 19, I guess, right, where Abraham does the same thing vis-a-vis Pharaoh, which is, oh shoot, we've got to go down because there's a famine. We're gonna be within kind of under the auspices of Pharaoh. For Abraham, you're beautiful. He's gonna want you as part of his whatever circle, and he'll kill me to get to you. So let's just tell a little lie. And the problem with that is that Abraham had just been promised that he would be the father of nations, right? And now he's giving away the woman through whom that would happen, right? And so in some ways he's mucking up God's fulfillment of the promises. And so there's probably a shade of that going on in the Isaac version of that, although it's not as played up.
Isaac becomes extremely wealthy on crops and livestock during his time in Gerar, to the point where Philistines became envious of him. So Abimelech says to him,
"Go away from us. You have become far too numerous for us."
Isaac leaves and makes the Wadi Gerar his regular campsite, reopening wells. His servants dig a well, and he quarrels over it with the shepherds, calling it Esek because of this challenge. His servants dig another well, and another quarrel happens over that one too, calling it Sitna. A third well is dug, this time without quarreling, calling it Rehoboth, as God had given him ample room to flourish in this land.
I mean, wells in general, right, are kind of symbolic. Often wells are kind of meeting places. Sometimes these are scenes where, like, betrothals take place, and women are encountered at wells often, and wells kind of are important in relationship to the community. Wells are certain symbolize kind of sense of fertility, abundance, right? So the possibility of having well-watered land and the ability to have prosperous crops and that sort of thing.
God had provided for Abraham, and Abraham had done the labor, and of course, being somewhat migratory, they had moved on from the lands. But of course, when they dig the wells again, and there's an abundance of water, the other herdsmen are like, "Yeah, this is our land now. This is our water." But God keeps providing. So instead of, creating a big battle there or trying to stand up for that, creates another one. And of course, God's providence and care means they do get stronger, and the flocks grow and influence and power to the extent that they end up becoming frightful, of course, of Isaac.
I think that's a common theme, not only throughout the Old Testament, but in the history of the world. Water is a precious commodity often, but water is always a crucial symbol in that area of the world in the Old Testament, because they're desert lands, and without water there is no survival. And of course the wells are the source of that word.
Isaac makes his way to Beersheba, and God appears to him there. "I am the God of your father Abraham. You have no need to fear, since I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So Isaac built an altar there, invoking the Lord by name. After pitching his tent, he has his servants dig a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come from Gerar, with Ahuzah, his counselor, and Phicol, his general.
Why have you come to see me, even though you hate me?
We are convinced that the Lord is with you. So we propose that there be a sworn agreement between our two sides, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you. You shall not act unkindly towards us, just as we have not molested you, but have always acted kindly towards you, and have let you depart in peace. Henceforth, the Lord's blessing be upon you!
Isaac made a feast for them. They exchanged oaths, and they departed in peace. Isaac's servants then struck water, and he named the well Sheba, hence the name of the city, Beersheba. When Esau is 40, he marries Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basmaeth, daughter of Elon the Hivite. This makes Isaac and Rebekah angry. Hold on. Why does it mention that they get angry at this? The mention of Esau's wives and their effect on Isaac and Rebekah is from another group of writers, the priestly division. This doesn't connect much with the preceding stories, but they do serve as an introduction to the following. Isaac was old, and his eyesight had failed him.
Son,
Hi, Tyson.
as you can see, I'm very old, and I can die at any time. Therefore, get your gear and hunt some game. Cook it and make an appetizing meal, and I will give you my special blessing before I die.
Hi, Tyson.
Esau exits to hunt some game, but Rebekah had heard this exchange.
Listen, I overheard your father tell your brother Esau to hunt some game and bring him a dish so that he may have his blessing. Now, son, listen carefully to what I tell you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice kids. With these, I'll make an appetizing dish. Then, bring it to your father to eat.
There is but one problem. Esau is hairy and I am smooth-skinned. Suppose that my father shall feel me. I will receive a curse and not a blessing.
Let any curse against you, son, fall on me. Just do as I say.
Jacob does just that. Rebekah grabs Esau's best clothes that were in the house for Jacob to wear, covers his hands and hairless parts of the neck with the skin of the kids, and hands him the appetizing meal.
Father, which of my sons are you, so that I may give you my blessing?
I'm Esau, your firstborn. I did as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that I may receive your special blessing.
How is it that you have succeeded so quickly, my son?
The Lord your God has fared me well with these things.
Come closer, son, that I may feel you, to learn whether you are my son Esau or not. Although the voice is Jacob's, the hands are Esau's. Are you truly my son, Esau?
Certainly.
Serve me your game, that I may eat of it, and then give you my blessing. Jacob does... Come closer, son, and kiss me. The fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of the heavens, and the fertility of the earth, and the abundance of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations pay you homage. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. And those who would curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed.
Mentos, the fresh maker.
Please, Father, take some of your son's game so that I may receive your blessing. Who are you? I'm your son, Esau. Who was it then that hurled game and brought it to me? I finished eating it just before you came, and I blessed him. Now he must remain blessed. Father, bless me too. Your brother came here by a ruse and carried off your blessing. He's been well named Jacob. He's now supplanted me twice. First he took away my birthright, and now he's taken away my blessing. Haven't you saved the blessing for me? I have already appointed him as your master, and I have assigned to him all your kinsmen as his slaves. Besides, I have enriched him with grain and wine. What can I do for you, son? Have you only that one blessing, Father? I beg of you, bless me too! Far from the fertile earth shall be your dwelling. Far from the dew of the heavens above. By the sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But when you become restive, you shall throw off the yoke of your neck.
When the time of mourning for my father comes, I will kill my brother Jacob.
Listen, your brother Esau intends to settle accounts with you by killing you. Therefore, son, do what I tell you. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury subsides and he forgets what you did to him. Then I will send for you and bring you back. Must I lose both of you in a single day?
I am disgusted with life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob also should marry a Hittite woman, a native of the land like these women, what good would life be to me?
Hold on. What? Yeah, this chapter also ends with an out-of-pocket reference to how much Rebekah and Isaac hate Esau's wives. Once again, this is from the priestly source, presenting a different reason for Jacob going to Paddan Aram, preserving racial purity. Yeah, there are a lot of things in the Bible that are very evil by modern moral standards, both religious and secular. Particularly in this chapter, there's slavery, polygamy, racism, incest, and idolatry practiced by some of the main characters without any sort of reprimand. I'll leave the explanation to the experts.
So, there are definitely things beyond my understanding, my grasp. And these are questions. The asking of the question is important. It's important to say, why wasn't God so much more directive in his word? Why didn't he write it? Start to page 1. These are the things you need to do. Do this and be life. Life will be good. And condemn everything that's a sin and wrong and evil. As we're reading in these chapters, who is the God of? The God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God is not the God of the Philistines. He's not the God of this land or that land. There's a distinction and there's a development of how God has interacted with humanity. Why, I don't know. Why not appear at the same time to every nation, every peoples on earth? And was there an openness in these particular people? Was it? I don't know. But I think there is deep clarity in the fact that there's right and wrong. And the fact that every character that we are hearing and reading about who are real people, were not just perfect characters.
Well, these things were all part of the human experience. Objectively, in hindsight, we would certainly say that things like polygamy and incest are wrong. But it is part of the human experience. It still exists today. There are people, we don't call them polygamists, but we might call them serial monogamists, going from one relationship to the other throughout their lives. Incest is still, a problem for some people, some families. When you're dealing with a smaller population, you certainly had, cousins that were intermarrying with other cousins, and they didn't understand, the complexity of intermarriage and some of the problems that can lead to that long term. I think interestingly, slavery officially has been abolished, but we still enslave people. We enslave them with dead-end, low-paying jobs. We enslave them in poverty. We enslave them with not allowing them access to adequate health care. That's a type of slavery, So I don't think we're completely away from it. Nobody's going around and actually worshiping, little statues or anything. But I do think we have idolatry still in the world. We put, money and money and fame and fortune and power as our ultimate goal. And, if you think about it, that is a form of idolatry.
Perhaps the most moral thing that human beings can accept, in terms of what is an essential part of a healthy moral code, is to accept that in some instances you just do it because God said to do it. I mean, there is a school called divine command theory, and I think there's something really wise about that. So in some sense, human morality, as we often think about it, is kind of secondary. I mean, ultimately, God commands and we obey, and our kind of moral rationalizing at some point comes to an end.
This sort of narratively is before the giving of the law at Sinai, right? So, one of the ways that the biblical text kind of develops narratively is we see God's role in creation, sort of creating first the world, and we see that kind of carrying forward through about chapter 11, and then it kind of focuses to God's choice of Abraham and the people of Israel. And then through the Exodus, we see a kind of second kind of creation narrative where God creates a people. And so in bringing them out of slavery, God forms them as God's own people. And then kind of the language in the book of Exodus is sort of, they're brought out of slavery, out of service of Egypt for service of God, right? It's kind of a transition, right? You served Pharaoh, now you serve God, right? So I think part of it is kind of narratively, this is before that kind of covenantal agreement between God and God's people is given, that the promise that's given to Abraham is this unconditional promise, right? It's, of land and of blessing and of descendants, but it doesn't there yet come with conditions. It's at Sinai where God gives the law and then sets these expectations, like if, in the book of Deuteronomy, if you follow in my ways and you keep my law, you'll be blessed and you'll be able to remain in the land, and if you don't, you're cursed, then you'll be kicked out from the land.
We can have a tendency to think of morality and ethical principles as fixed elements of human experience, when in fact I think that moral sensibility has evolved along with the evolution of human beings and their understanding through their experience. I'm not talking about biological evolution, but rather evolution in understanding. And so you do see development from the Old Testament, both in the ethical sense and behavior of human beings, on into the New Testament, that shows there is a progression or a deepening or an evolution of perspective on what really is moral and right.
In this version, Isaac sends Jacob off to Paddan Aram to choose a wife from the daughters of Uncle Laban. Isaac also blesses him.
May God Almighty bless you and make you fertile, multiply you, that you may become an assembly of people. May he extend to you and your descendants the blessing he gave to Abraham, so that you may gain possession of the land where you are staying, which he has assigned to Abraham.
Jacob went on his way to Paddan Aram, and Esau noted that Isaac blessed Jacob to not marry a Canaanite woman, and that Jacob obeyed. Esau realized how displeasing his wives were to his parents. Therefore, going to Ishmael to marry his daughter, Mahalath, Jacob journeys towards Haran from Beersheba. He stops at a certain shrine, using a stone for a pillow. He has a dream of a stairway going to the heavens with God's messengers going up and down, with the Lord beside him saying, I, the Lord, am the God of your forefather Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and your descendants. These shall be as plentiful as the dust of the earth. And through them you shall spread out east and west, north and south. In you and your descendants all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. Know that I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go, and bring you back to this land. I will never leave you until I have done what I promised you. Jacob awoke, exclaiming,
Truly the Lord is in this spot, although I had not known it. How awesome is this shrine! There is surely nothing but God here. And that is the gateway to heaven.
Jacob took the stone he used as a pillow and set it as a memorial stone, pouring oil on it. He named the site Bethel, meaning house of God.
If God remains with me to protect me on this journey that I am making, to give me enough bread and clothing that I shall wear, and I come back safely to my father's abode, the Lord shall be my God. The stone that I have set as a memorial stone shall be God's abode. Of everything you give me, God, I will faithfully return a 10th part to you.
So one thing that we see in the biblical text, especially in Genesis, there's a lot of etiologies, right? Stories about the origins of things, of names, of practices, of customs. So one of the things it seems to sometimes do is to try to describe or give a origin story for how something came to be. Like, why is it that there was this particular memorial in this place? Or why is it that so there's certain trees or certain memorial stones.
They felt like every place that God appeared to them, or a voice of an angel, or the encounter, they would mark it. They would give it a name. They'd give it a space. They would teach that to their kids. This is where we come to worship. Why? Because this happened here.
You know, a way of marking God's, the kind of like the human and the divine encounter. So it's a place, a sacred place, because there was the human and divine encounter in this place. And so that is kind of an intuitive idea, but you know, it's that there is even an encounter between the human and the divine, we kind of take for granted, but you know, it was probably the case in other ancient Near Eastern cultures that, you know, God was not seen as coming into contact in that way. So,
is that in the pagan mentality of the Old Testament era, places were holy. It wasn't like holiness is diffused widely in the world, but certain places would show themselves to be holy, and they would be shown to be holy because of events that occurred in that place. So because there was a manifestation of the gods or some holy event, that would indicate this is a holy place where that can happen. So they would set up stones to mark the holy place, both to indicate this is a holy place, but then to become a place, in essence, of pilgrimage, where people could come to seek out the holy by visiting the sacred zone.
Jacob resumed his journey and ran into shepherds with their flocks in the land of the Easterners.
Friends, from where do you hail?
We are from Haran.
Do you know Laban, son of Nahor?
We do. Oh, here comes his daughter right now with his flock.
Jacob told Rachel he was her father's relative. Rachel ran to tell her father, and he hurried to meet him. Jacob told Laban all that happened.
You are indeed my flesh and blood.
Jacob stayed with them for a month.
Should you serve me for nothing just because you are my flesh and blood?
Laban had 2 daughters, Leah the older and Rachel the younger. Leah had lovely eyes, but Rachel was well-formed and beautiful. I don't like saying this. Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel.
I'll serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel.
I prefer to give her to you rather than an outsider. Come with me.
So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, yet they seemed but a few days because of his love for her.
Give me my wife, so that I may consummate my marriage with her, for my term has ended.
So Laban invited all the local inhabitants and gave them a feast. But at nightfall, he took Leah and brought her to Jacob instead of Rachel, with them consummating the marriage. In the morning, Jacob was livid to find out that it was Leah. He went to Laban, outraged.
How could you do this to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why did you dupe me?
Why? In my culture, it is not customary for the younger daughter to get married before the elder. Finish the bridal week with this one, and I will give you the other one for another 7 years of service. Good.
Jacob agreed and finished the bridal week for Leah, and Laban gave him Rachel in marriage, remaining in Laban's service for another 7 years. He loved Rachel more than Leah. So now, Jacob has 2 wives, Leah, we use the red marker for Leah's kids, and Rachel, who are also his cousins. God saw that Leah was unloved, so he made her fruitful while Rachel remained barren. Leah had a son named Reuben, meaning, look, a son, or he saw my misery, according to the Alice source, or he will love me, according to the Elipis source. She had another son named Simeon, meaning he heard. And then another son named Levi, meaning he will become attached. And a 4th son named Judah, meaning I will give grateful praise. Rachel was envious of Leah for her ability to have kids, so she said to Jacob,
"Give me children, or I shall die."
Can I take the place of God, who is denied the fruit of your womb?
So Rachel gives her maidservant, Bilhah, over to Jacob as a consort. They had a son, which Rachel named Dan, meaning he has vindicated me, and another son named Naphtali, meaning in a divine wrestling match I have wrestled, or I engaged in a fateful struggle. Leah saw that she ceased to have kids, so she gave Jacob her maidservant Zilpah as a consort, who had Gad, meaning in luck, and Asher, which means in my good fortune. One day Rachel wanted some of Leah's mandrakes, so Leah exchanges them for a night with Jacob, therefore having a son named Issachar, meaning my reward, and later Zebulun, meaning bridegroom's gift, or he will give me presents. She also has a daughter named Dinah, which I could not find a meaning for. And then God remembered Rachel and made her fruitful, and she had a son with Jacob named Joseph. And Joseph means, may he add, and she wanted more sons after him. These are the names that became the 12 tribes of Israel.
Give me leave to go to my homeland. Let me have my wives for whom I have served you, and my children too, that I may depart. You know very well the service that I have rendered unto you.
If you will, please. I have learned through divination that it is because your God that has blessed me. So state which wages you want from me, and I will pay them.
You know what work I did for you and how well your livestock fared under my care. The little you had before I came has grown into very much, since the Lord's blessing came upon you in my company. Therefore I should now do something for my own household as well. You do not have to pay me anything outright. I will again pasture and tend your flock. If you do this one thing for me, go through your whole flock today and remove from it every dark animal among the sheep and every spotted or speckled animal among the goats. Only such animals shall be my wages. In the future, whenever you check on these wages of mine, let my honesty testify against me. Any animal in my possession that is not speckled, or a spotted goat, or a dark sheep, it is there by theft.
Very well.
Laban gave him the livestock as requested, and put a 3-day journey between him and Jacob. Jacob got some polar, almond, and plane trees, putting white stripes in them by peeling the bark. He planted these shoots next to where the animals drank from, so that the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted kids. He also had the sheep to face the dark-colored animals of Laban, producing special flocks of his own. He also avoided doing this with weak animals so that he would have sturdier animals. This strategy was based on the widespread belief that animals would produce different kinds of children based on visual stimuli. This strategy of you have this sheep here, and they're looking at a dark-colored sheep. They see them. Their kid will be a dark-colored sheep. This strategy works out for Jacob, and he became very prosperous. However, Laban's sons learned of him taking away their father's wealth, and God then said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers, where you were born, and I will be with you." So Jacob sent for Rachel and Leah to meet him in the field with his flock.
I noticed that your father's attitude towards me is not as it was in the past, but the God of my father has been with me. You well know what effort I put into serving your father. Yet your father cheated me and changed my wages time after time. God, however, did not let him do any harm to me. Whenever your father said, "The speckled animals shall be your wages," the entire flock would bear speckled young. Whenever he said, "The streaked animals shall be your wages," the entire flock would bear streaked young. Thus, God reclaimed your father's livestock and gave it to me. Once, in the breeding season, I had a dream in which I saw mating he-goats that were streaked, speckled, and mottled. In the dream, God's messenger called me. "Jacob!" "Here," I replied. Then he said, "Note well, all the he-goats in the flock, as they mate, are streaked, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all the things that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God who appeared to you in Bethel, where you anointed a memorial stone and made a vow to me. Up then, leave the land and return to the land of your birth."
Have we still an heir's portion in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as outsiders? He has not only sold us, he has even used up the money that he got for us.
All the wealth that God reclaimed from our father really belongs to us and our children. Therefore, do just as God has told you.
And so Jacob put his wives and children on camels and drove them off with the livestock and the property he acquired, escaping Laban by not telling him of his intended flight. Rachel had also appropriated her father's idols while he went to shear his sheep. On the third day, word came to Laban that Jacob had fled, and he trekked for 7 days with his kinsmen to catch up to him in Gilead. However, God appeared to Laban in a dream, telling him not to threaten Jacob with any harm.
What do you mean by hoodwinking me and carrying off my daughters like war captives? Why did you dupe me by stealing away secretly? You should have told me, and I would have sent you off with merry singing and the sound of tambourines and harps. You did not even allow me a parting kiss with my daughters and grandchildren. What you have now done is a senseless thing. I have my power to harm all of you, but last night the God of your father said to me, "Take care not to threaten Jacob with any harm." Granted that you had leave because you were desperately homesick from your father's house. Why did you steal my gods?
I was frightened at the thought that you might take away your daughters from me by force. But as for your gods, the one you find them with shall not remain alive.
Jacob had no idea that Rachel had stolen the idols. Laban looked through each tent, finally coming upon Rachel's.
Rachel! What are you doing sitting down?
Let not my lord feel offended that I cannot rise in your presence. A woman's period is upon me.
Oh! Well, I'll get out of your hair then.
What crime or offense have I committed that you should hound me so fiercely? Now that you have ransacked all my things, have you found a single object taken from your belongings? If so, produce it here before your kinsmen and mine, and let them decide between us two. In the 20 years that I was under you, no ewe or she-goat of yours has ever miscarried. I have never feasted on a ram of your flock. I never brought you an animal torn by the wild beasts. I made good the loss of myself. You held me responsible for anything stolen by day or by night. How often the scorching heat ravaged me by day and the frost by night, while sleep fled from my eyes. Of the 20 years that I have spent in your household, I slaved 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, while you changed my wages time after time. If my ancestral God, the God of Abraham, and the awesome one of Isaac, had not been on my side, you would now have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw my plight and the fruits of my toil, and last night he gave me my judgment.
These women are mine, these children are mine, and these flocks are mine. Everything here belongs to me. Though these women are my daughters, I will do something for them, and the children they have borne. You and I, we will make a pact, and the Lord will be the witness between us.
So Jacob took up a stone and set it as a memorial stone, and made a mound, called by Laban as Yegar Shahadutha, or Mound of Witness, and called by Jacob as Gilead, with the same meaning, and also Mizpah, or May the Lord keep watch.
Here is the mound, and here is the memorial stone, which I have set up between you and me. This mound shall be witness, and this memorial stone shall be witness, that with this hostile intent, neither may I pass beyond this mound into your domain, nor may you pass beyond into mine. May the gods of Abraham and the God of Nahor maintain justice between us.
Jacob took the oath by the awesome one of Isaac, and offered a sacrifice for his kinsmen to share a meal. Laban kissed his grandchildren and daughters goodbye and left. Jacob continued on his way when God's messengers encountered him. He said,
"This is God's encampment,"
naming the place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom.
"Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, your servant Jacob speaks as follows. I have been staying with Laban, and have been detained here until now. I own cattle, asses, and sheep, as well as male and female servants. I am sending my lord this information in the hope of gaining your favor."
We have news from Esau. He is coming with 400 men.
400 men. Divide the camps into 2. If Esau should attack one of the camps, the other camp should still yet survive. O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, you told me, O Lord, go back to the land of your birth, and it will be good for you. I am unworthy of all the acts of kindness that you have loyally performed for your servant. Although I crossed the Jordan here with nothing but my staff, I have now grown into 2 companies. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. Otherwise, I fear that when he comes, he will strike you down and slay the mothers and children. You yourself said, I will be very good to you, and I will make your descendants like the sands of the sea, which are too numerous to count.
Jacob prepared a gift of 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels and their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 he-asses to send to Esau ahead of him, with a servant to say,
Jacob is right behind us. If I first appease him with gifts that precede me, then when I face him, perhaps he will forgive me.
In the course of that night, however, Jacob took his wives, their maidservants, and his 11 children to come across the ford of Jabbok, along with all of his possessions. Jacob was left there alone, and some man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When the man saw that he could not prevail over him, he struck Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the hip socket was wrenched as they wrestled.
Let me go, for it is daybreak.
I will not let you go
fulfill your blessing.
What is your name?
Jacob!
You shall no longer be known as Jacob, but as Israel, as you have contended with the divine and humans, and you have prevailed.
You tell me your name, please.
Why should you want to know my name?
And with that, he bade him farewell. Jacob named the place Peniel.
Because I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared.
At sunrise he left, limping because of his hip, which is why the Israelites do not eat the sciatic muscle that is on the hip socket.
I think it is one of the most beautiful and the most important stories in the Bible, because it represents part of the human experience that we all have to wrestle with and study and struggle with God. And we don't know how that struggle will end, but however it ends, we will be changed. When Jacob is finished with his struggle, he has to walk with a limp. He is forever affected by this struggle, and he knows that somehow he prevailed, but at the same time, maybe he didn't. And that struggle is beautifully described in this metaphor of wrestling with the angel.
That is one of the best encounters. As not being a wrestler in high school, and honestly, I don't ever remember. We wrestled in gym class, so I did understand what it was in some ways, but my actual appreciation of wrestling was much more the comical, over-the-top, Hollywood-esque, WWE style wrestling, and this is what it is. I think when I went to a parish with a high school and went to wrestling matches and got to know them, I saw the intensity. In 3 minutes, the amount of effort and energy exhausted is incredible. Both girls and guys wrestling, it takes a lot, and they do a lot of training for that short little period. So imagine the intensity, the difficulty, the challenge of a 3-minute wrestling match extended through the night.
It expresses and is representative of, a very active relationship between God that is not without tension and without, even conflict or struggle. And I know the scripture scholars also say that in one way that story of the angel or the man, it's a little ambiguous who it actually was till later in the story, that it was actually God, was someone that the Israelites struggled with, and that's reflected in the whole Old Testament, with God's fidelity, but the Israelites and the Jews being faithful and then not faithful. But I think also the story of every human being who's trying to come to terms with life and the mystery of life and sometimes the tragedy of life, but the uncertainty of life that can really, when we're challenged especially by difficult experiences of life, can reflect that our relationship with God is not just a smooth, easy, always happy, but sometimes we find ourselves actually struggling with God.
It's odd, right? A lot of odd things happen. You can't quite understand everything that happens. There is this kind of closeness in the human-divine encounter. There is this transformation that happens through the process. They're both physically, right? He's not the same afterwards. He has this sort of thing with his hip socket, right? But also his name is changed, and right, this is kind of the tenacity of Jacob in the story is great, right? I think sometimes there's a lot to be learned in sort of just kind of holding on and not letting go without, here sort of demands the blessing. There's a kind of something about the Jacob character that's really just persistent, dogged. I don't know, that I find very, very appealing.
In kind of ancient Near East cultures, kind of God appearing in some form, usually human form, creating some kind of challenge that's kind of a common motif. But then, the people of Israel kind of took it, incorporated it, and kind of put it to their own use, which is kind of a way of identifying themselves as God's people. So, right, Jacob's name after the wrestling match is changed to Israel, which I think generally means like struggle with, right? So being in this covenantal relationship with God is marked by struggle.
Jacob looked up to see Esau coming with 400 men. So he divided his children among their mothers and went ahead of them, bowing to the ground 7 times until he reached his brother. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, and kissed him as he wept.
They are the children with whom God has bestowed graciously upon your servants.
What did you intend with all those droves that I encountered?
It was to gain my lord's favor.
I have to find. You should keep what is yours, brother.
No, I beg of you, please take all of my gifts. Since to come into your presence is to like come into the presence of God. Now that you've received me so kindly, do accept these presents that I have laid before you. For God has blessed me with them, and I have an abundance.
Let us break camp and be on our way. I will travel alongside you.
For as you can see, the children are frail, and I am encumbered with many herds and flocks. And if they are overridden for a singular day, they will all perish. Let my lord then go ahead of me while I follow behind at a slower pace. And I will meet my lord in Seir.
Let me at least put at your disposal some of the men I have gathered with me here. It's the least I can do for them.
For one reason, please indulge me in this, my lord.
So on that day, Esau began his journey back to Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth to build a home for himself. Jacob arrived safely at the city in Shechem in Canaan, a plot of ground on which he pitched his tent. He bought for 100 pieces of bullion, and he set a memorial stone there, invoking El, the God of Israel.
Certainly behind all of this, there is a sense of who's the real actor here, right? Who's the big actor behind all of this? And it's God, right? The primary actor in the book of Genesis is absolutely God. So yes, Jacob is able to steal the birthright, and Esau, they sort of all are involved in these different things, but who ultimately brings about the outcome that's intended? Well, it's God.
In the end, God's desire is not to pit people against each other. God's desire is not that we smite others, that one nation prevails. As the United States, we've gone through in our short history in many ways different attitudes towards the world and nations, and in a lot of ways we are striving to uphold human dignity, basic human rights in the world. We desire that other nations come to the table with some basic things.
I think you got to let go of the past. I think the story is written in such a way that eventually the 2 tribes, those descended from Esau, those descended from Jacob, were able to make some kind of peace with one another. And I think that's a good lesson for us, that sometimes when we're in conflict, time passes, time heals wounds, and we got to let the past go and move on and deal with the present in its present form. And part of that, I think, is forgiving our enemies, or allowing our enemies to forgive us if we're the perpetrator.
The ultimate realization of God's plan of salvation is no more war, right? I mean, war is definitely not part of the kingdom of God. And making amends would be a way of signaling that we have reached. I got a very old computer and it just died. A way of kind of there's been one very real moment of God's salvation history being realized with the Jacob and Esau making amends.
For human beings to live in peace, which all seem to desire, that cannot occur without those who have been in opposition or conflict making amends with one another and making that conscious choice to live at peace with one another, rather than pursuing rivalry or vengeance or aggressive, what do I want to say, equalizing of the score, but rather just letting the previous rivalry and conflict go so that people can live in peace. So I think in the end it's a message of peace and how to come to peace with peoples who have been in conflict with one another.
Here ends the lesson.